And welcome to our Thursday Deep Dive webinar. I'm Yomika Bennett, Executive Director of the New York Charter Schools Association. We're glad to be joined today by First Fidelity Brokerage to discuss insurance coverage, always an important topic, but particularly now. Over the last few months, or many months, we have received a lot of questions about liability in the context of COVID. And so we appreciate having Mark and Kelly joining us today. We're particularly excited to have the First Fidelity Brokerage team because of their knowledge and expertise that's specific to charters due to their long history of working with charter schools. The First Fidelity Brokerage team has more than 15 years of collective experience. Kelly Manchu is a public entity insurance specialist, as well as certified school risk manager. Prior to joining First Fidelity Brokerage as Executive Vice President, Kelly worked with a New Jersey broker as their Director of Public Entities. She trained and led a team of brokers focused on the engagement, marketing, and risk management of charter and public and private schools. Mark Muscatello brings almost 15 years of real-world school operations and management experience to his role at First Fidelity Brokerage. Prior to joining the firm, Mark Muscatello spent 8 years in school operations leadership at the charter management organization Uncommon Schools, ending his tenure with the organization as Associate Chief Operating Officer. With that introduction, I'll turn it over to the team. As with prior webinars, before we start, this will be recorded and the materials will be posted after the webinar. After the team presents, we'll field questions in the Q&A feature, and you can use the feature on the bottom of your screen to ask questions. Mark, Kelly, welcome.
Yomika, thank you so much for having us. Really appreciate it. I'm excited to have a chance to address the team here. Thank you for the great introduction for Kelly and myself. First Fidelity Brokerage has been in the charter sector since early 2000s, representing charter schools, both large and small. We're a property and casualty shop focused on the education space, nonprofit, and then also have a larger connection to a national brokerage. Little break in there, sorry. Peter C. Ford, who is able to offer a range of products from health benefits to anything else you can think of. So today we are going to be discussing COVID-19 and school liability basically in two sections. We're going to be talking about your liability program in the school, and then also your workers' compensation are the main areas of focus. Within that, policy exclusions will be discussed, mitigating your risk, cyber and liability exposure that comes along with remote learning, and then questions for your broker. On the workers' comp side, we'll discuss how COVID will affect workers' comp claims, and then also remote employment and how that workers' compensation claims could be impacted. Before we get any further, just kind of zooming out, there are a range of folks involved today, and I know kind of different levels of comfort with the insurance space. So I wanted to just kind of discuss kind of the very basics of your insurance program to make sure we all have a head start. Your authorizer in state law requires, some pieces. Some policies have, or some schools have, a range of more comprehensive policies available to them or as part of their program, but everybody will have these basic sections. Those include property, your building, it's a first party coverage if something happens to your school, building, or you have business interruption, your property policy would respond. Your liability program is broken into a number of parts. Today, we're really focusing on a couple here. It's general liability, which responds if there's a bodily injury claim. Today, we're most interested in how illness or COVID claim would impact your liability program, your general liability program. That would be the policy that would respond. Also within that liability section, there's a management liability, which might be called professional liability or educator's legal liability, depending on your carrier. This responds for negligence related to management decisions. So this would include failure to educate, failure to implement appropriate harassment, bullying policies, et cetera. So there's some exposure that comes along with COVID in those areas. And then another section which is required by state law is your workers' compensation claim, which obviously, or workers' compensation coverage, which covers claims made by employees while working. So in this instance, what would happen if a staff member were to contract COVID while working? Oops, sorry. So today, zooming out, the big question is, with COVID-19 and liability, are you covered? This is not the most thorough answer, but it really depends. There's a lot of things that are going to go into whether carriers are responding to these or open to covering these claims, some of which we'll talk about today. At the end of the day, it comes down to your policy. Everybody's going to have different carriers, and each one of the policies they have in place is different. So specifics of the claim and the language of your policy are really going to determine whether your carrier will cover a claim. During your renewal this year, I would have, as a broker, we discussed in depth with our clients their coverage and how it would respond given COVID claim. Your broker may or may not have done this with you, but if you have not had a larger conversation, we would recommend that you reach out and set up a time to talk. And we'll talk about some of the questions that you can ask your broker and some of the issues that you might want to identify today. And that's kind of our goal today. One of the main areas that we really want to make sure you discuss with your broker is exclusions that might be in place for your policies. All policies have endorsements and exclusions on them, which modify what coverages might be available or what coverage is available to you. Kind of zooming out on the property side, all property policies will have a communicable disease exclusion in place. Really, the biggest item within property for COVID claim would be business interruption insurance. That for charter schools, it's less applicable here because your tuition continues to be paid. For a private school or parochial school, this is a major area of discussion, but we just wanted to kind of fill you in on that. On the other side, your liability policies. Some liability policies will cover a COVID claim. Others specifically have exclusions for communicable diseases. So you want to, and even the ones that do have that in place, you can either buy back that coverage or get them removed, those exclusions removed based on certain criteria that your carrier would share with you. So important that you know what exclusions or endorsements might be in place for that policy. Zooming out, there's a consensus that claims are going to be difficult to prove. But that being said, litigation costs can be the biggest part of a claim like this. So you want to make sure that your legal fees would be covered, and there's not an exclusion in place that would disallow that. So you should connect with your broker to make sure that you don't have an exclusion in place, and if you do, if you can get it removed. So mitigating risk here. I'm sorry, Kelly, I think you were going to jump in on here, right?
Just waiting for you to hand it over to me.
Oh, is it?
Okay, mitigating risk during this pandemic. I think the most important message here is document, document, document. You all know what you have to do, what the World Health Organizations have said, what the different state health officials have said, what your specific districts have said about keeping the students and staff safe, from wearing masks to social distancing seats to covering your water fountains, using HEPA filters, keeping windows open, significant airflow will help. You've heard all that, you've learned all that, you're probably doing all that, but it's super important for you guys to document that. Document as you go. Document all written and verbal communication between between the administration and the staff, between the administration and the students, and particularly the parents. You want to be able to document that you took every course of action to keep your school and your students safe from contracting this horrible virus. If you do have a suspected case of COVID in your school, whether it be a teacher or student, you want to make sure, obviously, that you report it to your district, you report it to the local health organizations, and the sooner the better, because once it's reported, then the experienced individuals who do the tracing can get started on their end. You don't want there to be any delay. You don't want anyone to come back to you and say, well, because your school waited so long to report, 30 more people became infected. You want to show that you're on top of things, you're documenting any case, all the precautions that you're taking. You don't want to ever be accused of, dropping the ball on this, because litigation isn't fun. Everybody knows that.
The only way one of these claims is going to be successful is if the complainant or the plaintiff is able to demonstrate gross negligence.
Right.
And by doing this, it basically, you cover yourself to make sure that's not the case.
And that's where the documentation will come into play. You've proven that you've done everything that you're supposed to do. So, that immunity is there to protect you. Oops, did you change that, Mark?
Yep, sorry.
Okay, that's okay. I think we pretty much covered.
Okay, great. Just give me a slide. Say slide when you're ready.
Okay, cyber liability. Here's an important one. I think every school does have this coverage. If not, they definitely should have this coverage. Cyber liability and data breach coverage is extremely important, especially if your school, on your servers, your systems, if you house any sort of personal data relative to students or teachers, whether it be social security card numbers or credit card numbers based on lunches or school stores. This is really important to have. Cyber hackers and cyber criminals look at public entities as a really easy hit, just assuming that they don't have the best protections in place when it comes to their servers and their systems, because they are public entities and the money isn't always there. All it takes is, one email with the ransomware virus and someone unknowingly to click on something that pops up and you're infected, and before you know it, you're in the middle of a ransomware case in which, in order to get your data back, you have to pay a fee for these criminals to give you back your data. And then, of course, after that, there's coverage. The insurance company will pay for credit monitoring and how to handle the press. And, it's not a fun thing to happen. But I know, just over the past couple of years alone in New Jersey, there have been so many hits on school systems, and there was one school not far from me that actually had a ransomware attack twice. They had to pay the ransom twice in order to get all of their data back. So you add to that now remote learning and perhaps teachers working from home. Sometimes it might just be a few. Sometimes it could be your whole school and all your student body from home. And that's where you really have to be concerned. You want to talk to your IT people. You can switch the slides if you, Mark, thanks. You want to talk to your IT people. You want to make sure that your security systems, as far as your computers, are up to date. You want to have them, they can even run phishing drills to see if there are any cracks in your systems. If you do have staff logging into a portal type of platform to teach the students or to go into the grading system or emails, You want to maybe think about adding a level of authentication for them to log in. So it's not just a one-step password login. They have to go through another authentication process to get into your system. That just adds another level of security to ensure that you aren't the school that's hit with a ransomware claim. Also to be concerned about are the vendors. Some schools don't retain the social security numbers or credit card information. Sometimes that's done through a third party, whether it be payroll or lunchroom or school stores, whatever the case may be. You want to reach out to them, have your IT people reach out to them to make sure that they've upgraded their security system and that they've run tests to make sure that that data is not in jeopardy. I mean, although, again, the cyber liability coverage is there to protect you. It's there to pay, carriers will pay the ransom to get the data back. They'll help you rebuild data. The coverage is going to be there for that, for the credit monitoring, and that's what's so important about it. But, the downside of it is public, community, parent perception. They're not going to be happy. It's going to be a negative event for you in the press, and it's just something that you don't need. So make sure you talk to your IT people and make sure that they've looked into this, because there's a lot more access right now, and cyber criminals love it when there's a fire somewhere else and everyone's attention is on COVID-19. So is this a good time for cyber criminals to maybe hit a few schools with their cyber attack? So just be mindful. Okay, you can switch.
So kind of questions for your broker. I know we kind of zoomed through a lot of items there, but I think this is kind of the most important slide. If you take away anything today, it's really this here. You want to talk to your broker. You want to make sure you want to review the terms of your policy relating to all of these items. Defense costs, are they paid? Would you have choice of counsel? All of these are within your policy. Many policies, the limits include defense costs. So if you have a whole set of claims here, you can burn through those limits relatively quickly. So just knowing that going in and making sure that you've your systems and your systems are up and ready to defend yourself here. It's important. Again, carriers some require you to use their pre-approved counsels, others don't. It depends. So having that conversation with your broker now is important. Really simple thing to do is just ask to review the declarations page of your policy with your broker. There's these policies you're going to have 100 pages there, but only a couple of them are really, really important. Well, they're important. I shouldn't say that, but for your as a former administrator, this is where I would look. Focus on the amount of your coverage, your exclusions, and know what your deductibles are going in here. Talking about exclusions and endorsements as we did previously, I think this is number one thing to ask your broker when you get them on the phone. Are there any exclusions in your liability policies that are going to be an issue if there's a COVID claim? A lot of them are called communicable disease exclusions. It could be virus, bacteria, all of these, some of them have different names, but make sure your broker is aware. Some brokers, they just hit the renewal button, right? And might not know that, might not be paying attention if an endorsement or exclusion's added to a policy. So make sure that they give you an answer on that. And then ask your broker to provide input on safety committee meetings. This is another way just to show that you're going above and beyond for the safety of your students. A lot of carriers will provide on-site loss prevention trainings. Carriers are thinking about this already. So, your broker might be able to access some really useful items for you in relation to your policy.
I just wanted to add on just to piggyback on what you said. If you are in a situation in your school where there's a positive COVID case, teachers, students, 2-3 cases, I think it's important, even if your broker tells you that he assumes there's no coverage due to the fact that he or she has read the policy language, I would insist that the broker report this COVID claim to the insurance carrier, even if it's just for record purposes only to begin with, because there are going to be those carriers who are they're going to be a little more liberal when it comes to paying these claims. Some carriers are going to take the position it's easier to pay these smaller claims if it is a claim. It's easier to pay it to avoid the negative press than it is to go through months of negative press, because COVID-19 is nobody's fault. So just make sure your broker is on top of that and insist that they do report any sort of outbreak to the insurance carrier, because there could be coverage.
Great.
Thanks, Mark.
Yeah, thank you. The next part of this is going to be revolving around employee claims. Workers that are injured on the job or get an illness on the job are able to access benefits through workers' compensation. Generally, it is pretty difficult to prove that that a disease was contracted on site. This is obviously a very different case than anything we've seen for a long time. I think under existing law, case law is pretty sparse and old, looking back to tuberculosis and some outbreaks in the past. So there's some hurdles to prove this. And generally they're excluded, but I think this is going to be a different situation. Some states have already clarified this. California, I know, has clarified that there's a presumption that COVID was contracted on the job if you're in a public facing position. New York has not done this yet. Don't know if they're going to. The Workers' Compensation Board did release a bulletin stating that individuals who are work in an environment where exposure risks are higher are more likely to have be compensated for COVID-19 claims. Likely teachers will fall into this. We haven't seen it yet. Again, this is it's a depends kind of situation. But chances are that given the compensation, the workers' comp guidance from the board, the claims will be available. At the very least, you'll likely see people making these claims, even if the compensation board is going to deny them. It could, particularly with people maybe not wanting to come back to work. They've been working remotely. They're justifiably concerned about returning to work. I think there's a heightened environment of exposure here to think about.
Okay, my turn, right, Mark?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. So yeah, a lot of schools have gone to remote learning and teachers are working remote. A lot of schools have opened up on a remote platform for the first couple of months. They're going to try to go in person. Whatever the case may be, it just seems, whatever state you're in, it really varies district to district what each school is doing, what's good for them. But it's interesting the way the work comp boards in various states are looking to handle the remote worker and a claim that's submitted from an employee working from home. So one of the interesting facts that I read while doing a lot of research on this was if an employee is in their office, at school in their office, and they get up to take a break or to run to the bathroom or get a sandwich and they fall, they injure themselves, that's a compensable claim under workers' comp. However, if those same scenarios happen at home and the employee is injured at home, there's no coverage for that. So it's going to be really sticky to see, and I do think it's going to vary based on insurance companies. Some insurance companies are going to be a little more lenient, others are going to look for reasons to decline. It's really going to depend on the individual carrier. But some of the ways you can protect yourself from claims, and listen, some claims are fraudulent and some claims are real. It's just the way it is. Unfortunately, there are parts of the states that work comp is sort of a culture, and then there are people that take advantage, but then there are people who truly have a compensable claim. Either way, the insurance company is going to do their part to investigate. I think some of the ways you can reduce spikes in work comp claims when it comes to people working remote, make sure you have guidelines set in place, what the responsibilities are of your staff working from home. Clearly define work hours. Your work hours are from 8 to 4. If you get a claim, 11. If you get a claim incident report that at 11 o'clock at night the employee fell down the stairs carrying their whiteboard with them, they're going to deny that claim. You want to keep in touch with your employees too. I think this pandemic has been hard on everybody. We are social beings. And I think when you're working remote and you're not seeing your coworkers and it's just you and a screen in your office, it can get to people after the time. It can get to people after time. Sometimes they lose their focus, injuries can happen. So reaching out to your employees, letting them know, sorry, 1 second. Letting them know that you're there for them, you validate their feelings about working remotely, you understand. Showing them that you care really goes a long way. So regular check-ins. Some schools have gone to like a web-based clocking system where employees actually have to go in, log in their hours, log their breaks. That too will help track where employees are if a claim is submitted. If a claim is submitted, you want to make sure you reach out immediately to that employee and get as much information as you can. When did it happen? Where did it happen? How did it happen? Did anybody see you? That's really important to help to work with your broker and the insurance company to validate some of these claims. One other suggestion too is refrain from telling employees that are working from home that they have to go and buy new computers or buy desks or assemble their workstations, because if an employee is injured assembling a table that the school said that they must have this table at home to have a proper work environment. If they're carrying this table or assembling it, it falls on them, they break their hand, they're seriously injured, that is a compensable workers' comp claim. And as I'm sure you well know, your workers' comp premium is based by and large on the claims that you have during a 3-year period. So it can really affect your workers' comp premium. You can see a big spike because of at-home remote injury claims. So just be mindful of that. Mark, can you switch screens? Do I have one more?
Want me to jump in? So this is the one thing we saw going at the end of last year was there were carriers that, speaking of workers' compensation costs, carriers that actually were offering some discounts for the fact that folks were working from home, unanticipatedly working from home. Workers' compensation carriers charge different amounts for different types of work. So your teachers cost one amount versus your janitors costing another. Remote workers are a different amount than teachers and on-site staff. So if you do, in planning your workers' compensation budget this year, your broker most likely classified your teachers as teachers, not remote workers. So, if we do end up being in remote long-term this year, it's something to think about, making sure you get that discount back. Also, there's some discounts available from last year that still might be available depending on your carrier. So it's another item to discuss with your broker when you speak to them. Great. I know we kind of blew through a lot of items there. I want to make sure we had times for questions, if there are any, and to go over any additional items that might be interesting to Anna and the team.
Yeah, and if you don't mind, Mark, just sharing your screen so folks can see everyone as they talk. Otherwise, we're going to stare at this lovely blue screen, which is lovely. So thank you all so much. And I find one of the most difficult parts of my role is not overly representing for individual organizations or vendors, but I have to say, Eugene, who folks might know as EPOD, was a personal savior to me many times, and everything I know about insurance, I credit to EPOD. And I would also say, for bonus points, you should ask Mark about the poop fountain.
Oh,
that
I can play that video if you want. I have it on my desk.
No. We have other. If folks don't really go into the Q&A, we can go real deep on the screen sharing. But in Mark's role as a school leader, let's suffice to say he also learned a lot about insurance the hard way. So with that said, without questions in the Q&A, if folks do have questions, they should add them to the Q&A. But I think, Mark, reflecting on my experience as a school leader, and again, being very blessed to have worked with Eugene, who was always incredibly available and very patient. And I know not everyone has that relationship with their insurance company, and that these insurance documents are dense, right? Like, this is like, you know, why you have a lawyer to close on a house, right? Because those mortgage documents are not meant to be read by mere mortals. So if someone takes your all's advice, which it feels like the #1 piece of advice is sit down with your insurance document and call your broker. If they can't decipher it or can't figure out some of these questions about the exclusions or the workers' comp or things like that, what should they do? Could they call you?
For NESN members, we offer free analysis of full programs. So, I mean, even if you're concerned about the depth and breadth of your coverage, we're happy to evaluate that. And then specifically for this instance, we can drill down into the policies themselves to make sure, you know, if your broker's not available to speak, you know, talk this through with you, that you have what you need, A, and B, if you have an exclusion in there, you know, there's carriers that we know we're able to get them removed through XYZ, and we're happy to kind of work with you and your school to make that happen for you. So my contact information is in the document at the beginning. Feel free to reach out anytime. We can be helpful to either Kelly or myself.
If you could also put your email, anyone's email in the chat, that would be great. While I ask the next question, and I'll get to Daniela's question, which I think is really good, in just a second. But I think the next one that I would ask is, if someone were to undertake this exercise of calling their broker, reading their policy, and there were concerns or red flags, what flexibility do people have to change their policies right now? Because I think, to your same point about folks who sort of hit rinse and repeat, brokers who hit rinse and repeat on policies, I think lots of schools do too, right? Because until you have an issue like a poop fountain, you might not, you know, sort of be thinking really deeply about, you know, what your deductible limits are, right? It's like, after you get rear-ended, you know how much your car deductible is, right? But how many people know the minute before they get rear-ended how much their you know, collision deductible is? So what flexibility do people have midstream to make changes, especially in a pandemic environment, right? Is this sort of like having a medical pre-existing condition?
Well,
Go ahead,
can I take that one?
Yeah.
You want me to take that one?
Yeah, please go for it.
Okay. But I do really need to hear about this poop fountain another time, please. You didn't share that. But as far as flexibility to make changes via endorsements to policies, I mean, you know, I know we sound like broken records, but it really does depend on your carrier and their willingness to help out. I mean, truly, that's the bottom line. I would say, just from experience, though, you know, despite the pandemic, if you know, because of this pandemic, you know, your broker should be taking a look at your limits of liability as well, because, you know, in my experience with insuring charter schools, I had 80 charter schools that I insured when I ran New Jersey Schools Insurance Group. They typically would take lower limits than their district counterparts. But I don't know, if I'm a broker, and which I am, and I'm working on my schools, or my schools are I'm going to reach out to my schools. I'm going to sit down and go through the liability limits just to make sure there aren't limits that we could increase, or we should, because we don't know where this pandemic is going to take us now, or what's going to happen in December or January. And like Mark said a few times earlier, as far as these exclusions, there are carriers that will let you buy back these exclusions. They're going to charge you for them, but in the long run, it could very well be worth it. So looking into that and seeing what, you know, is it cost effective to do it? It's going to depend on the individual school. Now, having said that, there are carriers that are going to say, well, you know, we're not going to do that. We're taking the overall position that we're just not going to do that, because as much as this has rocked the school world, trust me, this has rocked the insurance world as well. Everybody is just scrambling. And, you know, Mark and I had a conversation earlier this week, and, you know, I was telling him that, you know, that the insurance market stateside typically are in a holding pattern until they see what the European markets are going to do. Once Lloyd's of London and some, you know, Zurich, London, and some of these European carriers react, the states tend to follow suit there. So I feel like all the insurance carriers are in this great big huddle, just waiting for Lloyd's to make some sort of step forward. And that goes for rating, or, you know, pandemics, or you know, tsunamis or hurricanes. It's just the way the insurance market is. So I feel like while there isn't a lot of information available right now as far as coverages and, you know, various insurance companies, and that's the reason, because this is so new to them as well. But again, the bottom line is your broker should have called you. You should have had this conversation. And again, you know, your jobs are running schools, not doing insurance. Your broker should have reached out to you to discuss all of these things with you. He should be looking at your policies, to look at your limits and your deductibles and your protections, and, you know, your cyber liability, all of these. Do you have it? I really hope you do have it. But
yeah, I mean, I think you can add pieces, Anna, to go back to your question. Mm-hmm. You might not be able to alter the policy you have in place, but if you don't have cyber liability right now, you can add that to Absolutely. Your program without a problem, right? So, and they're actually not super expensive policies, and given the current context, we cannot recommend them enough. We did have clients before this year that didn't have that in place, just because it's, you know, it's something that we'd recommend, or if you're a new school, you're just not, you know, you have limited funding, and it's just not, you know, we'd put it on the table as on the menu, but some people didn't want to eat it, right? So but this year everybody's taking it, right? Given the context.
Yeah, I mean, just speaking as a charter parent, you know, like I spend 30 minutes every morning at the beginning of my morning logging 3 kids onto Zoom before, you know, I get onto Zoom as an adult. And it is, you know, it's we as an organization were Zoom bombed early on, and so it's definitely a different environment. So before I get to Daniela's question, which actually links right back to that in terms of virtual attacks, I do just want to make the observation that in my personal life, I was definitely more of the Geico kind of insurance person, right? Where I just sort of pay as little as I can, and I think as little as I can about insurance. And then I think really saying that this is a different, and so I would never expect my Geico insurance agent to call me and say, oh, I see you got a newer, nicer car. Do you want to think differently about your insurance than you did before? But what I would say to schools is, school insurance coverage is huge amounts of money, and it's like a little bit of a different value proposition than thinking about potentially some insurance in your own life, where it really is a set it and forget it. And I say that in part having gone through, when I was a school leader, a significant environmental issue, and the long-term litigation, the fact that we were actually having to establish long-term liability for students and teachers who are in an environment. And I think, you know, it's a little bit different with COVID because it's somewhat of a time-bound illness, but even that, I think, is something that folks still don't know. And so this idea about the litigation could actually be the most expensive piece. And so understanding what is your coverage around, what is your legal coverage related to litigation. So, sorry, I should have gone straight to Daniela's question because it was so on point for the IT. So Daniela chairs a phenomenal small charter school, and only small because they're new, tiny but mighty, in New York City. And so her question is, what is the advice for a small independent school to protect them from virtual attacks? Because lots of schools, including hers, have no IT department.
I think that first, to make sure you have cyber coverage in place, for sure. Regardless, I know Daniela's school, and you know, the cost for a cyber program for her would probably be, you know, under $3,000, right? So it would be well worth that investment here. Beyond that, I understand in the first couple of years of school, you don't have an IT department. I would assume there's an IT vendor in place. If not, then I would look for, you can secure some security consultant on something like this. I know it's not, I mean, it's not going to be cheap, but I think it's not, but given the situation, again, this is one of those, what's negligent, what's not. So just having somebody doing an analysis of this will provide some reduced exposure. Kelly, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I just want to add that there are, you know, definitely what Mark said, you definitely have to make sure that you have the cyber liability coverage, but there are many cyber data breach carriers that, listen, they're proactive. You know, they want to come out and help you before they have to react to a claim. So they will come out to you, especially, they love the schools, especially the schools. They will come out to you. They'll look at your programs, they'll look at your protections, and they'll walk you through what you should and shouldn't do. And they'll test your system to see how safe you are, and they won't charge you for it. So I would go that route forward, because that could really be a cost savings before reaching out to a vendor. I'm not saying, I don't know who your carrier is, so I'm not saying that that is the case, but a lot of carriers that I have worked with in the past, like I said, they love the school people because, you know, you're doing great things. So they're more than willing to come out. So definitely check that out.
I think that's really interesting, because I think as an administrator, I would just kind of look at my carrier as like generally somebody I was going to argue with over like getting paid, right?
So hate Mark.
But now on the other side, I see how much that you can really take advantage of what they have to offer in loss mitigation. You know, they want to save themselves money, right? You guys you're both on the same page with that,
Right?
So you can be on the same team, and if you know you implement, you know, some their suggestions on these things, and then you do have a claim in the future, you know, it's more like a smooth road on something like that. So I think that's a really great point.
The client, the broker, and the insurance carrier should be working together as the team that they are, and not even, you know, it's not limited to coverages. It's risk management as well. You know, I hear all of these different organizations telling, even my local schools, open all the doors and windows, open all the doors. Well, that's a great idea to prevent the spread of COVID-19. But now what about the intruder aspect? What are you managing? Are you monitoring that? Are you having your facilities people, or maybe your security guards or monitors, you're having them, are they meeting to talk about this new exposure now? So again, this is something that your insurance carrier will definitely help you with, along with your broker and working with you. So it's important to have that team mentality to keep your insurance program, you know, intact, cost effective, and to keep the school safe.
Yeah, and I'd only add another thing I feel like I learned from EPOD over the years, sorry, Eugene goes by EPOD, was like, don't get hung up on the fancy incident form. The number of times over the years that folks at the schools that I managed would say like, what's our standard incident form? I was like, do you have email? I'm like, sit down, put in an email, what happened, who saw it, when it happened, and hit send.
Right.
And do it, and like sit down and do it then, as opposed to waiting for the sort of like formal incident form in triplicate. And I think that advice is more true than ever in terms of especially concerns that staff or parents might be expressing to you, how you're following up, right? Even if you're having those things as a phone conversation, as awkward as it may feel, to either send them an email or write yourself a note and say, just reminding myself, even if you do it by email, just as a reminder, I had this conversation with so-and-so today. This was their concern. My recommendation was that they did X, Y, and Z. And this is my other recommendation, always make it their responsibility to follow up with you, right? Let me know in a week how that went, or let me know, you know, on Monday how you're feeling, because that way you don't have to remember it. And then the only thing you have to do is make sure that part of your documentation, which is even just an email to them or to yourself, is that you opened the door for them to be back in touch with you because you care. And you do, you sincerely care, but you're also sincerely documenting. So Mark, one question for you before we potentially wrap, unless other questions come up in the meantime. We were so excited to launch a partnership with FFB around workers' compensation because, to your point earlier, I'm not sure folks necessarily realize the degree to which they can manage the cost of their workers' compensation and receive exactly the same benefits. And so we were so gratified to have it be one of the first member benefits that we launched at about this time last year. And so if I could put you on the spot and just have you explain it a little bit to the folks listening in,
Yeah.
I would appreciate it.
This actually was kind of the impetus for my slide around discounts and returning some premium. We work with New York State Safety Group 491 to deliver basically it's the most cost-effective workers' compensation program I've seen so far. And you know, we've did a number of quotes going into this renewal, and we saw savings for folks from 10 to 25% on the workers' compensation costs every time. So you do need to qualify based on your loss history, but you know, almost every school that we put through did qualify.
Which just means like if you have like an extremely unsafe workplace, you are not going to get in the club. Yeah, okay. Just making sure I understand. For the lay people out there among us.
Right, Mark, if you do have really unfavorable loss history, then again, your broker should be working on ways to change that. Again, the carrier is going to offer all kinds of in-person and online trainings. They're going to look at trendings to see what's going on. Is it the same slip, trip, and fall over and over again? Is it the same broken stairs? Like, there are ways to fix really bad. So if your losses aren't great right now, don't assume you could never, you know, you would never fit into this program Mark's talking about. It's just a matter of having the right team, the right risk manager work with you to get those losses under control.
Yeah.
So Kelly, could I, Mark, you wrap up the partnership, Kelly, could I just say, like, it's 50,000 foot level. If you don't know who your insurance broker is and they have not called you in the last 6 months, you have a problem. Agree?
You have a big, yes, a big problem. If you're doing renewal applications that are emailed to you by yourselves, that's, to me, that's a huge red flag. And it was my greatest concern when I did manage the NJSIG, and I'll just be flat out honest. I always felt that typically brokers, and not all of them, don't get me wrong, but for the most part, that charter schools did not receive the attention that they needed from brokers because the money, the commissions aren't as big as the public school end of it. And, I ended relationships with some brokers from the group because I got frantic and emotional phone calls from the charter school people that, they're just trying to do the right thing, and their insurance expired. They never heard from their broker. They didn't know they needed to tell him that he moved. He never asked. He was never around. So, you listen, you guys deserve that. You're paying for insurance. You're paying for risk management. You deserve that. You shouldn't worry about, insurance shouldn't even be on your mind. Running your school should be. I can't come in and run your school, and I'm sure you guys can't come in and think about insurance like Mark and I can. That's because we're all needed in different capacities. But yeah, to answer your question, shame on your broker if you haven't heard from them, and you deserve better.
We did have to send some of those an email this year because of the situation. But you should know their name at least. So with our workers' comp program partnership with Anna, we've been able to deliver some real savings to the NESN member school, or NESN, New York State Charter Association member schools. You can still get a quote on this for this year. I would say, some carriers, there's a early termination clause, but sometimes the savings outweigh that. So we would, it never hurts to send me your current policy, and we get you a quote and do the math and to see if we can save you some money. Totally worthwhile. And this program does offer, the discounts on remote working, and they were actually, which I really appreciated, they actually were very, took the lead on delivering that to, it wasn't like we had to hunt them down and get their, some of the carriers we work with, we had to hunt them down and get their, can we get this savings for our schools? And this group, they were at the forefront of delivering the savings to schools. So definitely, I think that's
huge. And I never thought about that, right? If you have some critical mass of your staff that's working from home, you should have a proportional savings on your workers' comp. Absolutely. So that's super, and a great observation. So I know Yumika has a question, and then I think she'll close out.
All right, great, thank you. Yes, I just have a question about legislation. At the top of the presentation, you mentioned some of the states had some exemptions for liability. So in New York, as people are thinking about, we have a few bills out in the legislature, and people are thinking of the issue of, what should the state do in terms of liability and COVID. Can you talk a little bit about what you've seen other states or on the federal level, and what you might recommend?
I think, we've been watching this on the federal level for months. We kind of expected a second stimulus package to be coming through, packaged with liability limits for COVID. It's, obviously, if you're in paid attention news, kind of stalled out. We're hopeful that federally this liability will be limited, but it kind of depends on our two branches of government there, co-equal branches coming together and making that happen. On the state level, I haven't seen much movement. Kelly, have you had an eye on this at all in New Jersey?
Yeah, there's not. What you said is perfect. It seems to have stalled, and I think again everybody's in that holding pattern, waiting to see, what happens.
They don't want to do it if they don't have to, right? Nobody wants to do anything if they don't have to.
Everybody came out right away and said, no matter what, our healthcare workers are going to be covered. But not, and at the time that was all we wanted to hear because we were so concerned. But fast forward to now, Now we've got all of our teachers and administrators and students in these classrooms that, you know, the risk is great, let's be honest. Yeah, there should be immunity. Yes, there should be exceptions for it. But as of right now, you know, there's no definite answer. But we, you know, one of the things that Mark and I do is we continue to monitor whether it's, you know, changes in legislation, health, anything like that. I'm always monitoring any changes to report back to our schools because, again, not everybody, you know, you guys have schools to run. You don't have time to monitor everything.
And actually, Kelly's going to be starting a newsletter, pushing out a newsletter from FFB. And, you know, part of this is legislation spotlight. It will be included in that. So, you know, it would be great to we'll be sending it out statewide. We'll make sure that it gets, you know, sent to Anna and the Charter Association to share as well.
All right, great, thank you. I think that wraps it up. We're just about to 5 o'clock today. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and thank you especially to Mark, Kelly, and Eugene for your time today. Mark, I need you to stay on because we need to talk about this fountain that Anna keeps. And Mark, Eugene, I need you to stay on. I need you to talk about the fountain I keep hearing.
Every time it rains, I
think that should be like bonus content. I feel like, you know, sometimes where you have like a movie you really like, and if you sit through the credits, you get like the bonus content. This is like if you.
we never shut down school though. I want to share that. I'm very proud of myself, and really happy that nobody found out.
Well, thank you very much. Everyone, have a nice, safe weekend, and we'll see you next Tuesday.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good day.
Bye-bye.